And another post-Brexit prime minister bites the dust. Keir Starmer owning up to the obvious that he's too unpopular to lead the Labour Party into the next general election. After replacing the hard left's Jeremy Corbyn, the same Starmer won a whopping landslide 2 years ago on the promise of stability after all the chaos of Tory rule. Where did it all go wrong? Can the heavy favourite to replace him win back disgruntled Labour voters who first flocked to the Conservatives and now to the far-right Reform Party? We'll ask about the politics of popular Greater Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham and reflect on the eve of Tuesday's 10th anniversary of the Brexit referendum if the same Britain that took a punt on leaving the European Union can rally behind any leader or any party to end a decade of turmoil. Today in the France 24 debate, is it Labour's last chance? With us from Liverpool, David Jeffrey, senior lecturer in British politics at the University of Liverpool. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Jeremy Stubbs is deputy editor of Causeur, the news magazine, and president of the British Conservatives in Paris. Good to see you.
Good to be here.
Annabelle Lever, professor of political philosophy at the Center for Political Research at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
Less than 40 miles from Makerfield, where Andy Burnham won that by-election that brings him back to national politics, is Macclesfield, home to such greats as Ian Curtis of Joy Division, footballer Peter Crouch, and France 24 senior correspondent Catherine
I wonder
Norris
when you were
Trent.
going to get that in. Hi, Francois. Nice to be here.
All right. Reminder, you can listen, like, and subscribe to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, it's a coronation, not a contest. It seems, at least at this point, even before Andy Burnham had been sworn in as Member of Parliament. After his resounding win in last Thursday's by-election, potential rivals putting their own ambitions on hold. So far, his bid is uncontested. Those were images of him being sworn into Parliament this Monday, and then earlier in the day, Keir Starmer, who'd been ripe for the chop ever since his party's disastrous performance in local elections last month. In his resignation speech, the 63-year-old former barrister listing his achievements in office before an emotional conclusion.
And when I leave the biggest job in the country, I shall spend more time on the most important job, being the best husband I can to my fantastic wife, Vic, who has been a rock by my side through good times and bad, and being the best dad I can to my beautiful children, who are my pride and my joy. Thank you very much.
Yeah, this kind of distinction Catherine Norris Trent made between Keir Starmer, the opposition leader, and Keir Starmer in government. And here he gets emotional when, as he says goodbye.
That last sentence is probably the first and only time I've heard anything emotional, really, from Keir Starmer. I mean, he made some passionate speeches about, going back to try and hold a second referendum after Brexit and things like that. But personal, emotional revelations have not been his thing. He's not been able to communicate, basically, emotionally and a political emotionally with the British public. He's not been able to tell any kind of story to move people, to bring people with him. And I think that's part of the reason that he's gone today, or he said he's announced he's resigning, because he just hasn't managed to make a connection with people. So it's quite ironic, really, that the last big sentence that he made as Prime Minister, we presume, is the most emotional. He's seen as pretty robotic by a lot of people.
So, David Jeffrey, it's not about his policies, it's about his lack of personal touch?
I think it's a mix of things. I mean, his popularity started to decline very early on when he tried to cut winter fuel payment, which is essentially money given to pensioners over winter to help them with heating bills. And that was a very unpopular decision. When he won the election, him and his chancellor, Rachel Reeves, both started talking down the economy, saying how bad things were going to be. And people didn't necessarily like that. They wanted optimism after the long, disastrous Tory governments. So I think part of it is the policy, and part of it is also how he sold it. He's not connected with the public. He often seems to U-turn, and he doesn't seem to have a sense of what he actually believes. He's more about process than he is policy or vision or outcome, and that's come back to bite him, I think.
How will he be remembered, Annabelle Lever?
I don't know, probably partly for his work as prosecutor, which was incredibly successful. Partly, I think, he feels like a lesson in what happens when people are parachuted into power too quickly, because he never went through the normal sort of things that MPs do.
He's a man in his 60s, too quickly?
Finding his job. Well, he had a whole career beforehand. He never really had to fight for a seat in Parliament, then to get a place in the cabinet. He was promoted very quickly. And I think you see the lack of political feel, and also feel for the Labour Party, that's really been quite a handicap for him, I think.
Jeremy Stubbs, what does he represent to the fact that, again, this 2 years on, he's already out?
What I'm about to say may sound unduly negative, but he represents things that he is not. He became leader of the Labour Party because he was not Corbyn, which is a very, very good thing. He became Prime Minister because he was not Conservative, which may be a good thing in some cases, but it's not enough then to lead. And he was, as we know, recently criticised by a public essay by Tony Blair, who said the problem is not his personality or lack of it, it's the lack of a real economic plan. And he came into government having made certain promises about what he would not do, and found himself boxed in, unable to manoeuvre, unable, for example, to divert money to the defence budget, which we so desperately need, unable as well to refuse people things. He's done U-turns on, triple lock, on winter fuel payments, where he wants to please too many people, and he just can't. And in the end, he has pleased no one.
Can I just ask, is it really the job of the Prime Minister to have an economic programme? I mean, you'd hope it's the job of the would-be Chancellor of the Exchequer. You choose the person. But it doesn't seem suitable that the Prime Minister is meant to be making it up. That seems to be someone else's job, no?
Well, I think someone else should put it into execution, but the Prime Minister and the government generally must be involved in creating a plan and
a vision. He seemed to lack
a vision,
a coherent vision, which he could tell to the British people. He didn't have very much margins for manoeuvre because of the fiscal rules that he and his Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, had set for themselves. And they just didn't manage in this day and age of social media and very little margins of manoeuvre in terms of what money you can actually spend to carry the public along with him.
All right, we'll see if his successor is a people pleaser or somebody with a vision that he'll stick to. Andy Burnham, first elected to Parliament a quarter century ago at age 31. He's long been a rising star inside the Labour Party, as Delano de Souza reports.
When Andy Burnham secured his return to Parliament with a seismic victory over Anti-Immigration Reform UK, his victory speech in Ashton in Makerfield was intended for a national audience.
The word Makerfield in the future must be known as a byword for the change that came to British politics. This is the moment. We've been on a path for 40 years that simply hasn't worked for people and places in this part of the world. And this now is the change moment. We have an opportunity to turn the tide.
Last week's by-election was the first hurdle for Burnham as he eyes Britain's top job. But this isn't the first time he's thrown his hat in the ring for Labour Party leader. In 2010, he lost out to Ed Miliband and 5 years later was beaten by Jeremy Corbyn. Andy Burnham's been mayor of Greater Manchester since 2017. He's been credited with regenerating the city, improving services and revamping the region's transport system by bringing it back under public control. Nicknamed the King of the North, Burnham's perceived to be on the political left of Keir Starmer, and he's pledging to repeat his signature brand of politics, which centres on people and regions previously ignored by governments in London.
With Keir, I think he's too much for his own people, whereas Andy is like one of us, and he understands what we're going through, and we're not in the backwater anymore. You know, we need to come forward, and he needs to look after us, and we'll be behind him all the way if he does that.
I voted tactical, knowing that Andy Burnham has a chance to replace Starmer. So it will still be Labour, but he will have different views.
Andy Burnham has risen through the ranks of previous Labour governments. The 56-year-old has expressed a desire to see the UK rejoin the European Union. While Burnham's critics accuse him of changing his views to score political points, he's seen as one of Labour's best communicators, an asset for the party after recent election losses as it seeks to dent the rise of Nigel Farage's Reform UK.
David Jeffrey, interesting listening to that report from where you're sitting in Liverpool. Let's begin with a question. Each time that I return to the United Kingdom, it feels as though when you're in London, everything's fine. But when you go to a lot of cities, you can see how the high streets have become a little more dilapidated. A few more stores have shuttered. Is Andy Burnham the one who can reverse that?
Possibly. I would say that Andy Burnham, in his role as Metro Mayor for Greater Manchester, has had. It's a very easy position to be in, where your main job is to constantly pressure central government to spend more money on your area. But if there's only so much money to go around, which in the UK there is at the moment, because taxes are already, record highs, people feel like they're paying too much in tax, you need to start deciding which area gets money and which bit loses out. And it's going to be very interesting for Andy Burnham now that he's not just simply asking for money, he has to distribute it, if he can make those tough decisions. I mean, we've already seen in the campaign for him to become an MP, one day he said that he was very sympathetic to the plight of the WASPy women. These are women who had the state pension age raised, and they claim they were not aware. And then 2 days later, after realizing how expensive that would be, he kind of backtracked on that. So he's already been seen by some as kind of flip-flopping on big issues when it comes to making those difficult decisions about how to spend money. So we'll see if he, as Prime Minister, he can make those trade-offs.
It sounds like you have your doubts there, David.
Yeah, I do. And not just because I'm from Liverpool and he represents Manchester, but I think that it's much easier to stand on the sidelines and shout than it is to actually do. And he will face the same economic structural issues that Keir Starmer faced, in that we borrow a lot of money, interest rates are quite high, energy prices are high. There simply isn't a lot of oomph in the economy at the moment. So it's hard to redistribute wealth when there isn't that much wealth to go around. Not much wealth to go around. And again, this sort of dichotomy, like we feel it here between France, in between Paris and the rest of France, but it seems even greater since Brexit between London and the rest of the UK.
Yeah, I don't know about since Brexit. Probably you're right, but between London and the rest of the UK. I mean, I grew up in the north of England, and it was very, it was a time when the mines were closing, industry was closing, and it felt like a huge world away. And since Brexit, there have been people who have felt that these areas are still being left behind. That's why you hear Andy Burnham talking about 40 years of failure there, and saying that he really wants to bring up, these areas of post-industrial Britain. Whether he can do so is a really different question, because personally, as a kind of northerner, as I would define myself, I'm excited about having a prime minister from the north, redressing those regional imbalances which have historic long roots, and making people feel that they really have a voice at the table from the regions and parts of Britain which feel that they're not doing as well as London and the South East. That's a huge task, and he doesn't have a huge margin for manoeuvre.
But as David Jeffrey says, Annabelle Lever, the coffers are empty.
Well, they may be, but it seems to me there are several things you can do. I mean, one of them, I'm very interested in what happened in Preston, where you had this effort to use government spending locally to boost the local economy. And as far as I know, they've actually been fairly successful there. So clearly there are things you can do at a local level.
And that's what he wants to do. He wants to decentralise.
So I'm very keen on that. The other thing I think is you need to redistribute, because under the Conservatives, the cuts in local government, which were brutal, I mean, they were like something 50% since 2010. I mean, it's really brutal, really hit poor areas most. And so I think there is some scope, at least, for moving more money to poorer areas to boost local government and people's role in sort of directing their lives.
After Scotland voted to remain as part of the United Kingdom, the then Conservative Prime Minister, David Cameron, promised to address this issue of sort of devolution within the country to give more power to the regions, to the municipalities. But it hasn't really come about, has it?
Well, there's been increased devolution in Scotland, in Wales, and people have, shall we say, acted on that by voting in their own nationalist parties. But the trouble is that all of these places, like local government, they're dependent very largely on Westminster for a lot of their cash. And if you're in local government, as Mr. Burnham has been, you can say either, I got you the cash from above, or say, I don't have the cash and it's all the fault of those above. Now he is the one above. We want to know where he's now going to get the cash from. And I noticed that Manchester is itself, I think, 1.6 billion in debt. So, OK, we've got to live with debt.
Yeah.
We know that's a condition today. But there comes a point when it gets very, very expensive. And his remarks on the bond market didn't encourage people that he would be very good at borrowing.
All right, so it'll depend on what his plan is. By the way, Burnham was a guest of this very show in 2017, shortly after he became mayor of Greater Manchester. There, sitting across from Jeffrey Goldberg, editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. He defended the notion of devolving more power to regional and local bodies away from Westminster, but up to a point, pushing back against the then wave of Catalan separatism and northern regionalism in Italy that I asked him about.
It can be exciting on one level in that it empowers people at local level, but when it becomes very driven by nationalistic feeling, then I think it becomes quite dangerous.
Jeffrey Goldberg, your reaction to what's going on in Spain and Italy?
I mean, it is, again, it's a symptom of something that's happening worldwide, this decentralization. I was going to say, by the way, for the mayor, he's mayor-centric now, but when he wants to be prime minister, maybe he'll feel back to a national focus.
All right, the same Jeffrey Goldberg, who, by the way, mistakenly got on that Signal chat group.
Yeah, I was going to say, great panel.
Catherine Norris-Trent, back then, I thought, all right, journalist, a little bit buttering up a politician there, but he did sense something, Jeffrey Goldberg, when it came to Andy Burnham.
Yeah, it's the oldest trick in the book, isn't it? Being able to say, yeah, like you say, when you've got the luxury of blaming the central government, then you do that in politics. But he won't be able, presuming he does go on and become prime minister, which everyone basically assumes that he will be now, he won't be able to do that for very long. And given the speed at which British politics is moving, and people are going to be out for his blood, basically, because we seem to be turning over prime ministers at a quicker rate than, I mean, I can't remember any time in my lifetime when it was like that. And going back in the history books, you have to go back some way to see. We're going to have 7 prime ministers in just over a 10-year period. It's pretty frenetic. So yeah, he's not going to have much of a grace period, and he's going to have to come up with the goods.
7 prime ministers in 10 years. David Jeffrey, obviously, it's more than even Italy, some would say. Italy, which has become stable for a long time. I looked it up, by the way. Peru is still more unstable. They've had 10 in the same period of time. But still, why 7 in 10 years?
Yeah, so I suppose in some ways that's a bit of an unfair comparison because it just takes the very end of David Cameron's time in office. You know, he was prime minister for 6 years. I think there's a few reasons. One is that there have been big challenges within, so for instance, Theresa May was solid in many ways, but she was not a campaigner. She threw away a majority in 2017. And then the problems for her kind of came from that. Boris Johnson, his character was fundamentally flawed to governing, but he was great at winning elections. And then Liz Truss, short-term disaster. I've argued in the past that the reason Liz Truss won was because Conservative Party members didn't want Rishi Sunak, but MPs didn't listen, and anyone would have beaten Rishi Sunak, essentially. He came in to clean up Truss's mess, and then Starmer, who, again, like we heard earlier, was not really very good at politics, but he seemed to be saying the right things about fixing the Labour Party. So I'm not one of these people who thinks there's big structural issues with British politics that means we're ungovernable. But I just think that being prime minister is a really hard job, and we just haven't had many people who have had the unique combination of skills that you need. And this is true in many places. I mean, Starmer really should have been a 5-year prime minister at least, with his massive majority. But obviously, that was only built on 35% of the public vote. So his his mandate in the Commons didn't reflect his mandate in the country, and that I think was forgotten by Labour very often when they thought they could do whatever they want and the public would still like them. So I think I'm quite an optimist, really.
Yeah, because seen from this side of the channel, this instability is born from that Brexit vote in 2016. Again, we're on the eve of that 10th anniversary, but did it perhaps start sooner? Case in point, the Labour Party. It had a leadership contest in 2015. Burnham back then finished a distant second to Jeremy Corbyn, who, in the build-up to Brexit, paid lip service to remaining in the EU, while being a Brexiter at heart, say his critics. Couple of questions here, Jeremy Stubbs. First of all, Andy Burnham, again, he ran for leader of the Labour Party in 2010 and 2015, but that 2015 election was kind of a seminal moment, perhaps for more than just the Labour Party, but British politics as a whole.
Well, it's said that that's the moment when he realised that the future developments would take place at the local level and left the Westminster bubble, and supposedly then brings back a new vision. But it's certainly true that the country has gone through a kind of turbulence that we've not seen before. I mean, even Corbyn's election, he was a man of the far left at the head of the Labour Party. And then after all of the Brexit turmoil, Boris Johnson comes in as somebody who, long before, no one would have thought would become leader and who would only be able to be leader in very special circumstances. And then Liz Truss, where did she come from?
So why?
The Liberal Democrats.
But again, some of this precedes the Brexit vote. Why did British politics, which used to be dominated by these two big tent parties, suddenly get so volatile? What happened?
I think maybe I'm wrong. It seems to me, I don't know about you, but my feeling is we were always told that, the two-party system led to coalitions within parties. But I think it's become to the point where the coalitions really are breaking up. And actually that might be a case for PR in and of itself, some form of PR, because by and large now the parties are so internally diverse that when you've got a large parliamentary majority, which was always a danger, they just pull apart. And it seems to me that's very much what we've seen with the Conservatives and we've seen now with Labour. So
kind of like frogs in a wheelbarrow when you're the leader of a big party with a big coalition?
Well, I mean, famously, big majorities are the excuse for backbenchers to run wild. But I think it's not just the backbenchers. It's that there's no intellectual cohesion anymore within any of these parties. And it's not entirely surprising because the spectrums have become so very big. At least that's my sense.
David Jeffrey, does Andy Burnham have intellectual cohesion? He's gone from being a moderate to more to the left, and now he's going to have to swing back more to the centre, if I understand this panel correctly.
Yeah, I mean, there's the classic joke, a Blairite, a Brownite and a Corbynite walk into the bar and the barman says, "What would you like, Andy?" And this kind of, this echoes the sense that he's been a bit of a political chameleon. But I think his time in Greater Manchester certainly has given him some strongly held views around the importance of devolution, around this idea that we need to look again at the political economy of the UK and the emphasis on technical skills over university education. He spoke about, I mean, it's quite telling that the constituency that he won was a more traditional white working class constituency. If he had have had a different constituency in Greater Manchester that was maybe younger or had a higher level of immigration or was more ethnically mixed, he might be able to say different things. But he's won a Brexity he's won a Brexity constituency, and I think some of his views will kind of flow from that as well, because they'll be the people that he hears when he still has to have his his weekly surgeries, or his team will hold them to be the local MP. So I think we'll see this kind of consistent devolution, economically interventionist kind of soft left idea. Now, whether that will be radically different from what the Labour Party's been doing for the last 2 years remains to be seen. But it will at least be communicated more effectively, I think, is an assumption we can make.
David, you bring up an important point, which is that constituency where he won. Makerfield, this is near Wigan. It's rugby league country. It's working class people who know how to grind it out, and those people are swinging more and more towards the far right.
Yeah, well, it was certainly an area that Reform won heavily in the council elections previously, only a few months earlier. And it's quite interesting that actually Andy Burnham, despite being an establishment politician and despite being a Labour Party MP, he managed to run on the same message that Reform ran on in the local elections, which is vote for me and you can get rid of Keir Starmer. And so he managed to be an anti-establishment vote, despite being a politician who's had a long pedigree in British politics, and that's one of the reasons why he was so successful. But yeah, he is definitely representing a kind of Brexity area, and his pitch to the Parliamentary Labour Party will be: I know what we need to do to head off Reform, and also win over Lib Dem voters and Tory voters who gave him their vote in this most recent by-election. Let's not forget that the Tories and the Lib Dems and the Greens got about 1 to 3% each, so they were basically nowhere. Basically, he unified the anti-reform vote.
Jeremy Stubbs, it was interesting listening to commentary on British radio this Monday morning, and they were contrasting the Labour Party with Reform UK, this party of Nigel Farage. They weren't talking about the Conservatives. Are the Conservatives irrelevant?
Well, not completely, because they did have a victory in Aberdeen up in Scotland where you might not have expected it. So there's a little bit of a boost. But it's true that Reform are the opposition, although I would say with very few MPs.
Explain that to us.
Well, they're ahead in the polls. And it's the polls that count, although I understand that an extrapolation from current polling to an election in the House of Commons would give no one a majority, not even Reform. So, that shows don't just believe what the polls say. And it has to be said that the defeat of Reform was so decisive in Makerfield that Nigel Farage must be asking himself some questions, at least. It's not the end of Reform, of course, but he's also got Rupert Lowe and Restore UK on his right, who stole a bit of the vote there. So his positioning is becoming increasingly difficult to define. I mean, the Conservatives are squeezing up a little bit, Restore squeezing down a little bit. All of that positive polling, it's not going to be enough in what is now 3 years' time. 3 years.
He's got to find competent MPs now, and preferably ones that aren't completely alienating and disgusting.
Their social media feeds
right.
of all their candidates, because they've been getting people who've been, having to be selected as local election candidates and then deselected because they said a whole raft of completely unpalatable things. And even you had Robert Kenyon, the man who was the Reform candidate in the Makerfield election, the by-election, who basically he'd written on social media, I am a sexist, and had, hit out in many different ways at women, who are obviously 50% or a bit more of the population. So they have a big infrastructure problem, having come from nowhere. But the reason that they've become so big is because Nigel Farage, again, is a very effective communicator, like it or not, and he is good at social media, if you rate his success in any way, and he can speak to people and put together a simple message, often with, dog whistle, racist undertones, but he can call on people's fear of immigration, and he comes across as an authentic man in the pub who can talk to people in a normal way, which Keir Starmer couldn't, and maybe Andy Burnham can speak to people in a bit more of a normal way and come across as authentic in any case.
Come across as authentic. Here's a question for you. Before Keir Starmer had even resigned, Donald Trump was already tweeting about it. British tabloid newspaper The Sun headlining Done and Dusted. Trump, who blasted the outgoing PM for, as he put it, quote, failing badly on two important subjects, immigration and energy. He wants to drill in the North Sea. An endorsement from Donald Trump, is that a good or a bad thing?
I don't know if it's an endorsement from Donald Trump.
Well, in this case, yeah.
I mean, the fact that he hit out over the weekend before Keir Starmer had announced it was not particularly elegant, but I don't think
the elegant isn't the word one tends to
we're
associate.
expecting a great deal of elegance. Now, how Andy Burnham is going to deal with Donald Trump is a massive question. He's completely untested on this kind of national scale. He has been government minister back in Gordon Brown's government, but for a short amount of time. And since then, he's been, as we've been saying, in local politics. So how is he going to be on the international stage dealing with Donald Trump, possibly with, Vladimir Putin, or when it comes to the war in Ukraine and the huge global things? We just don't know.
David Jeffrey, this is the same Donald Trump who's, peddles in official State Department policy this immigrants are ruining Europe line. We saw how Elon Musk has been furiously retweeting far-right figures from the UK after recent anti-immigrant riots in Southampton and Belfast. So how will Andy Burnham deal with that? Better, worse, the same?
I think it still remains to be seen. Like was just said, we don't have any evidence of Andy Burnham on the international stage, so it's hard to tell. But he still faces the same structural issues that Keir Starmer faced. So he still has a parliamentary Labour Party that is very hostile towards Donald Trump. He still has a public that is very hostile towards Donald Trump, and yet he still has to work with Donald Trump. So he will probably try to strike the same pose that Starmer has been doing, which is basically not outwardly offend Donald Trump, but still prioritise working with European partners and world leaders through NATO, than go all in on this so-called special relationship in the same way perhaps that Theresa May did. So I think he'll continue the pivot towards Europe.
He'll continue to pivot towards Europe. He's been outspoken on that. Last week, the EU had even firmed up a July 22nd date for an EU summit devoted to relations with the UK. The bloc, though, saying it's reassessing the summit may be called off, at least for the time being. This, of course, depends a lot on whether or not there is a contest for the Labour leadership. Annabelle Lever, a couple of questions here. Should Andy Burnham be saying, let's return to the European Union? Should he be calling for a referendum to return?
My feeling is yes, but I also wonder whether it needs to be a referendum anymore. I know this sounds stupid, but on the other hand, it's not clear why that in particular is a topic for a referendum as opposed to the many other things. I mean, there are lots of other things you might be wondering about. But actually, I just wanted to say something about the other talk, because one of the things that's very striking, I think, nowadays is that prime ministers are being forced to engage in international relations in a way that didn't used to be the case, for example, under Callaghan or Wilson or the others. And I wonder if it's partly one of the things that's pulling them away from Britain and making it very hard to do the job. The job has changed, it seems to me, in ways that are really very demanding. And they're now having to play the role of foreign policy maker, or at least on the foreign stage, in ways that really, I think, make the position of Prime Minister much more like a president and actually not at all what it ought to be in our British system.
The UK's standing in the world used to be fairly straightforward. There was the European Union for some things, and then for defence, there was the United States. And it seemed pretty straightforward for 8 decades. Now it's not straightforward.
No, things have been reversed. In other words, we're not in Europe anymore, but on defence, we're with Europe. And they're our most likely partners for development in the future. And Donald Trump, at least, wants it to be that way, so that we pool our resources with Europe and don't expect handouts from America. Now, this is a new situation that we just have to get used to. And I think everybody was taken by surprise in this, and yet you could have seen it coming to some extent. And it means really that Britain, well, as you say, Francois, that it's a new situation, but we've got to mature into it. And actually, that's one of the areas where I think Starmer was not doing too badly, and where there's already a bit of a basis for Burnham to follow once if he gets into office. We're assuming a lot, but if and when he gets in, there's something of a path mapped out, and the Europeans are ready and waiting to do things, not to welcome Britain back in, I don't think, straight away. The price would be very high, but they're ready to do things with us and willing to.
Catherine Nostrum.
Well, and also, we've just been talking about how Andy Burnham got elected in what could be considered, perhaps a pro-Brexit kind of constituency. So straight away come out and say we're rejoining the European Union, or I'd like to, is very politically delicate for him. So he's not going to, I would predict, not going to do that straight away, if at all. He's probably going to try and fudge some kind of closer relationship and then say different things to different people.
I mean, after all, what you're saying is there are lots of different things you can agree on and to share with European partners without it having to be this either or. And I think that's part of the problem with the referendum thing, that it makes everything either or as opposed to their packages.
But it's such a divisive issue, such a touchstone issue in the UK, that we saw it in recent years, that every time the government moved to have kind of closer cooperation with Europe in some way, you'd get the tabloids, you'd get the press saying this is Brexit betrayal. So,
but that's the press, no. I mean, it looks like all the polls now suggest that, by and large, there's a majority for closer relationships, and closer relationship not necessarily in. But it seems like the press are really pushing, at least the right-wing press, are pushing an agenda.
It's still an emotional issue, I think, to a lot of people, whether they think someone is an elite from Westminster or working for them.
A small point, a lot of those who voted for Brexit in 2016 are departed.
No longer with us,
David Jeffrey, we talk about how much the UK has changed. On the one hand, the fact that there was this July 22nd summit plan barely raised eyebrows, closer ties between the UK and the EU seeming more palatable to a lot of people. On the other, again, this surging party, Reform UK, is a pro-Brexit party. It's an anti-EU party. It's been accused of even having pro-Russia sympathies by some critics. What do Britons want? Do they want to be this radical? I was looking back at the history books. Has there ever been such a strong far right? Why is it?
Electorally, no, there hasn't been. And I think this is all part of a symptom of two things. One is this sense that the country doesn't work for people who pay in. And secondly, is that the country has consistently voted for political parties who say they will reduce immigration, and immigration has consistently gone up. And certainly, we've not even had a period of kind of net outward migration in a long time. And this happened under Labour, and that's one of the reasons why Labour lost their traditional working class heartland, because people wanted lower immigration. It went up. Then under the Conservatives, we were promised Brexit would reduce immigration. Boris Johnson's take back control meant he took back control to open borders. Immigration shot up massively. And even now we see things like asylum hotels. Andy Burnham talked about ending HMO Britain, this idea that asylum seekers are now being moved from hotels into homes within communities, and people just don't like that, and they often get called racist by especially those on the left. But you can only call the public racist for so long before they go, well, that word means nothing to me. I'm going to vote for this party that is actually promising to do something, even if it's radical. And then on the left, you see the same thing with the recent surge of the Green Party, where people are going, well, Labour hasn't worked for me. The economy still feels rigged against me. So I'm going to try voting Green, even though it's a massive leap into the unknown. So there's a huge dissatisfaction with the main two parties who structurally just haven't been doing what they say they're going to do for people. And people are willing to take a risk on something new because they've got no faith in establishment politicians anymore.
No faith in establishment politicians. You heard Annabelle Lever earlier talking about how when you have a big majority, you basically have coalitions inside the tent of a big party. Is it a good thing if we're headed towards a situation where in the future you won't have whopping majorities, you'll have to form these coalitions between different parties, kind of like they do just naturally in places like Germany and Italy?
Yeah, well, I guess what was the most recent stable government that we had in the UK? It was the Conservative Liberal Democrat coalition, where the Conservatives were the majority partner. They came in with the Lib Dems and had an agreement for government. They saw through that agreement, and then there was a general election at the end of 5 years that was our last stable government was a coalition government.
And they destroyed
so
the Lib
I don't.
Dems. They
Well, yeah, but
destroyed
then
the
the
Lib
Lib Dems
Dems.
came back, and we call this the Black Widow effect, don't we? This idea that smaller coalition partners do lose out in coalitions, but that's not a uniquely British thing. That's a European thing. We see this across the continent. We see this in PR systems, and arguably that was the Lib Dems' own fault for not being sensible in the policies, for reversing on tuition fees. That was a totemic issue for them. So that was a political skill issue. But I think. I'm not worried about coalitions in the UK because our system isn't actually based on party. It's based on who can command a majority in the House of Commons. That doesn't need to be from one party. So it's quite flexible in that sense. But I suspect that by the time of the next election, we'll have a system of PR. I think that the UK is moving towards that. Because there's no way our electoral 5-6 party politics can be translated into seats in a way that everybody, even the losers, feel like they've had a fair shake of the stick.
Catherine Norris-Trent, that's not necessarily a bad thing, this sort of fragmentation?
Well, it might help people feel more included in politics if they feel that their vote actually means something. Because at the moment we have the first past the post system, which means the winner takes all in their constituency. And so a lot of people, the turnout figures have been plummeting. People don't feel that their vote counts. They don't feel it's useful. That's why we're seeing a lot of protest votes. Perhaps if we give people a bit more of a PR kind of proportional system, then they might get more involved in politics and feel that they can actually have a vote that means something. We clearly don't have a two-party system anymore in the UK.
Don't have a two-party system. We've been seeing file footage of Larry the cat. For some reason, on a day like this, when you're on stakeout duty in front of number 10, the cat gets a lot of attention. I guess that's sort of the also a reminder that prime ministers come and go, but Larry the cat stays, Jeremy Stubbs.
I think if there is a figure who can bring us all together at this time of crisis and drama, it is Larry the cat.
It's not even a joke. I think he's probably the person, the figure who can unite most of the UK on social media at this time. He's outlasted 6 British prime ministers now. We were just looking through the photos, I believe, on social media.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Catherine Norris-Trent, Jeremy Stubbs, Annabelle Lever, David Jeffrey for being with us from Liverpool. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.